And that's one of the reasons that that they left together and formed Growers, is because they wanted to be able to run the company their own way. And Dr. Tietjens also wanted the freedom to do his own research without being told by somebody else what his goals had to be, what his parameters had to be. So he did that. I mean, Elena Farm, right? The book I mentioned before, just bought that subpar farm, and that was his research property for a long time. Wilbur Franklin did quite a bit of his own research. We've heard from that he encouraged Matt Gooding when Matt was growing up to do some research in his greenhouse, stuff like that. So it's always been a core part of Growers, is to, yeah, like you said, Marguerite, verify ourselves that the things that we're telling other farmers, we've actually experienced ourselves. We're not just pulling them out of a hat or doing it because Purdue or somebody said that it's the right way to do it, or Michigan State said that. And then that went on a bit of hiatus for a while after Wilbur Franklin passed away, but it's been quite a blessing, I think, to have Matt Gooding come on and restart that process so we can see some of our own results again.
So I heard you mention test plots, and I think that would be another kind of example of this self-verification. But what other methods, and maybe even some of you guys who farm want to jump on and share with me, but what other methods do you guys use that you found that work, that are self-verification methods that you can use to actually sell the product or share how it's made a difference for you? I'd love to hear some of those examples.
I'll open up the floor before I give any answer on that.
I know somebody on here has something to say. I see Larry.
Repeat the question, please.
Hi, Daniel. What did you say? Could you repeat that?
How's that?
Could you repeat what you said, Daniel? I didn't hear it.
Could you repeat the question, please?
Yes. My question for everyone is, you know, I've heard of doing test plots as a way to reach this self-verification that our product really works, but what are some other methods that you guys use out in the field to verify that this product works for you, that this growers program overall works for you, that you share with your customers to sell the product? What do you guys do to see that self-verification evidence? Maybe this is a harder question than I thought.
No, I'll bite. This is Steve Cutterback. Can I jump in?
Yeah. Go ahead, Steve.
Hi, this is Steve Cutterback. How's everybody tonight?
Hey, we're good. Hey. We want to hear what you have to say. We're excited. Thanks for talking.
Well, I can tell you several things. Wilbur Franklin has actually been on my farm when my father was involved with sales of growers. And it was always a great time to have him out. Things have evolved in agriculture today. I have monitored my combine that measures to the pound of what my yield is. I have to have it verified by the weigh wagon or at a scale house next door, and so we know exactly what our yields are. And I'm with the Climate. I put it on the cloud, and if I give out my username password, anybody can see my yield data. Another one would be Bruce Nash from Western New York. He placed 5th in the New York State Corn Growers with a 282 bushel yield last fall. So there's lots of different ways for promoting and verifying the yield check. Same title, just done different ways.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Steve.
Thank you.
Hey, I'll bite. Yeah, I'll bite on this. I know one of the simplest verifications is the independent aspect of what it shows up in animals. When we used to do rotational grazing of beef here and sell everything directly to the consumer, you would see in the summertime, especially the animals' coats may fade a little bit, or going into September when the grass would be fading out a little bit before the spring or fall flush. And so what we would do is, I mean, I remember this is, I mean, I was fairly newly married, and we'd see these cattle going downhill a little bit looking off, and we would go out and foliage feed growers on their pasture. And I mean, 3 or 4 days later, you could see it in their hair. I mean, you would just see the shininess, and we had Holsteins, and the black would get blacker and the white would get whiter, and that's independent verification that the visual aspects of this and the cumulative aspects just keep going, and you see it, and so again, when from a research point of view, I mean, I used to drive the truck when I was 16 years old on a Saturday night. Instead of chasing girls, I was sitting in line because we were doing check plots into the night for growers. I mean, we farmed 700 acres, and that's what we would do. We would run everything over the scales, and as Steve Cuddleback said today, man, they got all this fancy electronic stuff, and it's like crap. I mean, we used to try to figure out how to not have to run to the elevator to do scaling, and I know Dad came up with a device, and it almost worked. Wilbur, man, we worked to make this thing work, and it was a trip device. It would count every like 55 bushel, and you'd have to mount it on top of the truck, and we tried all this funky stuff to try to prevent that running to the scales to learn something. But the youngest person on the totem pole, that was me, even though at 16, I had other places to go. That's what we did. That's what we did. Yeah.
You had ladies to chase, Matt. You were missing out.
Yeah.
We love
yes,
it.
we did. Yeah, we certainly missed out. It was all worth it, though. We finally caught the right one. Took a few years, so.
You did. We love her. Yes.
Yep.
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 Well, thank you for sharing that. I thought you might bite on that one. All your fun research there. Anybody else have any? Hey, Larry, how are you?
Good. How are you guys tonight?
Hey, we're great. We're having a fun time here.
Well, let's go one more step.
Okay.
So Eddie Yancey and we went to visit a local orchard guy one year, and we said to the guy, "You can taste the difference." And he said, "Okay." So we went back to see him in the fall after he had used some growers, and he comes out of the cold storage with 2 apples, 2 Empire apples. He said, "Okay, which one's the grower's apple?" So I took a taste of both apples and I said, "There's your grower's apple." And he kind of had this sheepish look on his face. And I said, "I'm right, aren't I?" And he said, "Yes, you're right." So growers can make fruits and vegetables. You can taste the difference. Just like the cows and the livestock, they can taste the difference too.
Yeah.
That's awesome. That's a great example. I mean, maybe Zach, maybe some of you other guys know that already and have heard that. We've never heard that. I've never heard that.
No.
Oh, she's heard that. I've never heard anyone say that you could taste the difference. I've heard us talk a lot about, especially with the CNA, the nutritional difference, but never that you could actually taste that difference. I love that. Thanks for sharing, Larry.
You got to get a garden started, Marguerite, and start using some growers.
Well, I know I got to get a vegetable garden started. And Larry and I talked about that, and I have plans.
Good.
So this weekend is a big start for me. I was just telling Asa that earlier.
Well, maybe we can get somebody to send pictures to prove that you're actually doing it.
I'll do that, Larry.
Thank you, Asa. I'm counting on you.
Yes.
Good plans come sometimes
Out.
hurt, Marguerite.
Larry's calling me out. All right.
You
Challenge
betcha.
accepted. Challenge accepted. There is a video somewhere from my previous house when we planted some grass. I did do that with growers.
Okay.
Did you taste the difference,
There's video
Marguerite?
evidence.
It's a
I had
start.
help, but there's
Okay.
video evidence.
Okay.
Marguerite, could you taste the difference there when you went grazing?
Stop. You guys are too funny.
Well, yeah, I think we can go on. I know I've heard lots of stories in the States and up here in Canada of, like Larry said, guys, produce growers noticing a difference in taste, or their customers noticing a difference in taste, especially if they're if they have a fruit stand or a shop or something like that, they're selling direct to the consumer. Working closely with Eddie, who's a dairyman for you guys that don't know. He's noticed quite a difference between him and his neighbors, and even remember his dad telling, like, they started back in the 90s on the growers program, and Eddie was too young to remember a lot of that stuff, or what it was like before that. But they inherited a pretty rundown farm, and so it's really come a long way using calcium and in the growers program. And they proved it to themselves, which is kind of the whole point. Rather than just do something because somebody else tells you it's the right thing to do, take what they tell you and try it out. And if it doesn't work, or if it only works partially, tweak it or scrap it. Or if it does work, great, keep it on. And that's kind of, our primary goal from the beginning has been the success of our customers. And so, we want to see you successful, and whoever that means to you.
I love it, Zach. I think too that kind of that self-verification we just talked about, it's very clear that looking at that part of the program, that can really, as a salesperson, help you be very successful. Because like Larry said, and like Matt said, and like Steve said, there are these tangible things that you can show people, tell people, have them taste, right? To tell the difference. But let's talk about some of the other principles and how we can be successful at those. You talked about it being a high quality fertilizer. So that being part of the reason that you don't have to use such an excess of it. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about what is the purpose of using such a small amount of fertilizer? What does that really do for us? And why is that so counterintuitive to what everyone else is doing? Why is nobody else doing that?
Yeah. Again, it starts with Doc Tietjens didn't start using a small amount of fertilizer for the sake of doing that. He wanted guys to spend less money on fertilizer, really. And he figured the best way to do that was to find a more efficient way of using it rather than just broadcasting it out there. So he started with just dissolving dry fertilizer in water, and he found he could use, I think, 90% less and get the same results. And so he went from there. He did his work on hydroponics and growing produce for the soldiers. And that's how we slowly started to develop what we know today as GMS, the 10-20-10, the hot mix, the clean stuff. So it started out for the purpose of economic purpose, saving farmers money. And certainly that's still the case today. I mean, even in the high price environment like this, it's at least predictable. But as we've learned more throughout the decades, what we found is that plants respond a lot better to what I would call targeted fertility. Giving it a small dose of highly efficient and highly available fertility when it most needs it. So like I said before, when you get your soil in order, you get your soil microbiological population especially in order, a lot of the nutrition that a plant will need in any given season in its life cycle can be supplied by the soil. And that's the way that God designed it. And then again, most of what a plant does is produce sugar, which is carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, which is sunlight, air, and water. So, right, you're not even talking fertilizer there. You're just talking the health of the plant being able to photosynthesize. But then what we do is when the plant's not able to do that as much, again, during stress points, we can come in with not broadcast fertilizer, not a low quality liquid that you still have to use 12 gallons of in order to get a response, but a high quality, efficient liquid product that you can use a small amount of and get good results, get excellent results, in fact. It's counterintuitive because from a sales perspective, sell more, make more. So if you can convince the guy to use a ton if you can convince a guy to use, let's say, dry fertilizer, 300 pounds when he really only needs 100, well, he doesn't need to know that, right? But you just made 4 times the money off of him. So that's one reason it's kind of counterintuitive. The other is that a lot of agriculture works off the assumption that growing a crop is a mathematical equation. It's pretty simple addition, unit in, unit out. You want this many bushels, that requires this many of each nutrient. You don't want to, what they call, mine the soil, which means you don't put any fertility on. It'll take that nutrition out of the soil and eventually there won't be any left. So you have to replace that. So you need, I'm just pulling a number on my hat here, but 200 units of N nitrogen, 200 pounds of nitrogen to grow this many bushels. So you have to put that much back in. And that's kind of their philosophy. But soil doesn't work that way. It's a living mechanism with the microbiology, constantly cycling nutrients, specifically targeting those nutrients to the plant. You're getting nutrients added back into the soil through rainwater, through organic matter, certainly through some fertility, not to mention the massive amounts of fertility that are not natively in most soils. That to reduce it to simple unit in, unit out costs a lot of money. You have environmental degradation because you're using way too much fertilizer. And often you have unhealthy soil microbes because a lot of that fertilizer will have salts and heavy metals in it. And just kind of an unhealthy crop, because that's not the way crops were kind of designed to go. They're supposed to live in a symbiotic relationship with the microbes. And so if you have an unhealthy microbial population, you're going to have an unhealthy crop. And so we're counterintuitive because we're not trying to profit as much as we can off of the farmer. We want them to be successful, and then our success is downstream of that. And we want, we recognize that growing a crop is not so much a mathematical formula as much as it is an art, that you kind of have to let the crop and the soil and the microbes do their thing to the best of their ability and not put any obstacles in their way, and then just give them a little boost of high quality fertility when it needs it most. And that's it.
Hey,
So-
Zach, I'm going to add to that. Wait a minute, I'll add to that.
Okay,
I
Matt.
want to ask you. I want to ask you two girls a question, because this is
Oh,
probably
no.
another way to add to it. Oh
There we
yeah.
go.
Oh yeah. Here we go. So, if I was to feed your kids something sugary for breakfast and for lunch, what's going to happen the rest of the day?
I'll let you answer that one.
Well, I don't do that, so I wouldn't know.
She doesn't do that because her kids go crazy.
They do.
But my kid is more like, I can't even think of a good analogy, but I mean, he's pretty naturally calm. That's his always. So, I mean, my mom will give him a lot of sugar and he's still like the same baseline level of calm. He's a really unusually calm child, let me tell you, but her kids are crazy.
Yeah, mom would be even crazier if they had too much sugar.
She's got
Yeah,
the fun,
okay.
wild ones.
Yeah.
Okay, so now explaining the growers program and the excesses of why other people use more fertilizer and we can get away with less. If you was to line up all the basic elements that's used in agriculture, nitrogen, potassium, phosphate, the trace elements, calcium, magnesium, if you was to line them up against one wall and say, okay, we're going to race to the next wall elements. We're going to do this through biology, soil, plants, on your mark, get set, go. The winners would probably be the nitrogen and the potassium, because they are the ones that move through the tissues the most. They tend to take water with them. And so why we get away with less with growers is we've taken all these, just like your kids are different, all these different entities, elements, and we've bonded them to one element, phosphate. We've held them to that. Doc Teasens used to say, and Dad always said, it's a one salt solution. In other words, everything's bonded together. So even the sugar is kind of in that, is kind of the analogy here. So therefore, we're not forcing, an excess of nitrogen and potassium like conventional ones are. They tend to make more of a hollow growth. The plants tend to be a little more wacko, like kids on sugar. They don't take, they're less healthy. They're more prone to disease. And so by bonding everything together there, that's the secret. I mean, that happens, how that is expressed in the field, that kind of answer one of your first questions, observation, Marguerite, is you will find that where people use growers next to conventional operations at planting, and the corn's maybe 6, 8, 10 inches tall. And I've seen this year after year. We have customers in the Great Swamp up here in Northwest Ohio, which is prone to being flooding and then draining out in the old canal system they have. What'll happen is because that's a one salt solution, the biology takes that in and holds on to it, and it stays there. And a lot of these flippant, singular, unbonded elements, I'm going to use nitrogen and potassium again, since they kind of like to fly around, they end up in the river. And you will see it in the corn. You can drive through that area and you can pick the grower's customer out just by how that corn looks, because that one salt solution stayed in that soil and stayed around that plant to continue feeding it. And these other fertilizers are gone. And it's amazing. I mean, until we had customers in that area, I had never seen it that dramatic. It was crazy. The plant just looks brighter and broadleaf and perfect color. And all these other fertilizers, like I said, they run away. They have nothing to hold them back, much like kids.
That's such a good analogy, and so clear for us to understand, because you think, sugar rush, and then the big crash after. And definitely the lack of nutrition and being more sickly and that sort of thing.
Yeah, it's just like if you feed them protein, or if all of you feed them protein or vegetables or something, they had broccoli and stuff, that's more complex nutrients. It's all together. It isn't like sugar that goes, wah, and then they bounce off the walls and you bounce off the walls chasing them. Yeah.
Nearly every time my daughter has too much sugar, she'll get sick afterward. It's not just like a crash and she goes to sleep. She'll get hyper, much I think like Freya and Alika, but the next day she'll have the sniffles and feel sick. So it's
so all that so all that hyperactivity comes from Russell, correct? That's Russell's side of the family, right? Okay.
Yeah,
okay, got
I'm
it.
very calm, Matt.
Yeah. Yep. That's what I figured.
Your nose is growing there, Asa.
Yep.
Well said, Matt. Russell can't defend himself. I think he's muted.
So Marguerite, Asa, a question for you.
Oh, another one? Wait. Okay, no, we're ready.
All right. This one might be a little easier to answer. We'll see. It might not be.
Okay.
When you guys were, because you guys got exposed to growers at a different time. Asa, yours would have been slowly, I guess, through Russ, and Marguerite once you came onto the company. What was your impression of the program when you first were being exposed to it? What was the knowledge you had, and what did you think it was? What did you think we were doing? Did you kind of think we were just another fertilizer company, stuff like that? What was your impression?
Well, I'll start, because I think my introduction also was more recent, but so I've been with the company almost 3 years now. And for me, when I went into my interview, I actually didn't know much. I knew a little bit about the company, but I really didn't understand the potential environmental benefits from the company. And that was one thing I talked about a lot in my interview, that I asked questions about it. And I was so intrigued by that, because I actually come from, for those of you who don't know, a geology and environmental science background. And so the environment is something that I'm very passionate about. And I was really fascinated because I had done projects on, fertilizer and excess fertilizer and, golf courses and runoff from all these different things. But I had never, in the process of those research things, found growers. And that was absolutely fascinating to me. So when I came onto the company, one of my things was, wow, we got to tell everybody about this. That was one of my first impressions, was this is, a golden secret that everyone needs to hear about. And we have to get that message out there from a more environmental standpoint, because that hasn't always been, growers' focus. Like you talked about with using less fertilizer initially being about cost, and it's cheaper to use less too. I mean, it's crazy, but it's so much better for the environment. And for me, that really was really was what I saw as kind of a purpose for me to be here and me to work here, because I so strongly feel for the environment. But as far as knowledge specifically about the program, I would say that came more slowly. My very best example of this is yesterday, Asa said to me, what, GSC? She's like, oh, we have GSC. And I'm like, what is GSC? And she's like, it's another product we have. I'm like, we only have one product.
And
I'm like, what are you guys talking about? And they're like, actually, we have 3 products. So we have, GMS, we have NA, and we have GSC. And I'm like, that is not what I've been telling people. And that was like yesterday. So I'm really glad we're doing this, because I do think sometimes when you're, in the office and you don't have experience out in the field, we don't hear about all these parts and pieces, and it's super important to understand, have that knowledge. And being in human resources, I have almost no involvement with sales of products. And so that was something I just never heard about. 3 products. So you guys are all laughing, I'm sure, but you're muted, so I can't tell. It's okay.
The first time I think I had real exposure was when Matt Gooding came to Rick and Jenny's house, I think in 2014 or 15. And he gave me the presentation with Russ, just a little bit about growers and the benefits. And I think you showed us a comparison between a traditionally grown tomato, a organic tomato, and a grower's grown tomato, I think, Matt. And I remember you said that the grower's grown tomato was bigger and had more nutrition. And I remember thinking that was really, really cool. Like, wow, like I can't believe this is not more known. And I just thought, like Marguerite said, it's like a hidden gem. And I knew at that point that at some point in my life, I would be part of this organization. And I think, we ended up here, and I'm really excited to be part of it.
All right, Zach, now you share yours.
Mine actually was similar to yours, Marguerite. Similar to both of yours in one sense, that I was pretty gung-ho at first, thinking that this is, well, I've heard other guys say it, the world's best kept secret. Mm-hmm. Yeah, like seeing the potential without really having a limited knowledge of the program, thinking like, why don't more people use this, before I knew how entrenched people could be in doing what they've always done and who they were listening to. So I came at it from the environmental perspective too, right? Seeing the problems in water systems and overuse of nutrients and stuff like that. So I was excited, to kind of learn that it doesn't have to be this way. You can grow very good food using far less, as well as just, you can use it on obviously crops, food, livestock food, grass, turf, like sports fields, lawns, flowers, bushes, whatever. Anything that it's green and it grows is good for it. That was pretty exciting and simple. I'm a simple person. I don't like complicated things. So if you're telling me you can have one product to grow any plant you want, I'm like, that's great.
I love that. And I will say too, I feel hearing all of us say, what a surprise it was to us and how it really is this hidden gem. And the sales rep saying that it's the best kept secret. I feel for all our DMs and sales reps out there. What you guys do is absolutely amazing, because I am sure that all the time when you go, people are like, I would have heard of this. This is unbelievable. It can't be that great, right? And you are also loyal and continuing to use the product and show us, every day with all these different ways that you verify the product that it is that great. And we love hearing those stories. And so we really appreciate you for doing what you do, but I also feel for you, because it is really unbelievable in a lot of ways, the impact that this product has. And on that note too, before we kind of went on this tangent, I was going to ask a question about calcium, because I think a lot of it isn't just our product, it's this kind of the whole program, right, with adding in the calcium. And so I know that calcium is really important, and you talked a little bit about that, Zach, but if we're also teaching that when you're looking at the soil, the plant naturally has so much of what it needs, because soil really is this, mechanism that functions and is really self-efficient in a lot of ways. Why is it so important to add so much calcium?
Yeah. I think in part it's because we demand more out of the soil. And in part around here where agriculture has been prevalent for a long time because it's been abused. You often think of a forest, right? That has no cultivation, no additions, no man-made additions, that is. And it seems to do pretty well just on its own, right? But we're not demanding out of a forest that which we demand out of a field. A forest, you walk into a forest, every other tree's dead. And that's good. That's great for a forest. But if you walk through a cornfield and every other corn plant was dead, you consider the field a failure, right? We're also not growing an entire tree every year and then chopping it down and then growing an entire tree the next year, right? So we demand a lot more out of agricultural soils than you would out of a natural soil. And as a result, calcium is needed in a higher quantity in plant tissue than nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus. So, but it's the nutrient that has not been added in most cases. And on top of that, the soil's been abused. And so the soil microbes have also faltered. They've been imbalanced as well. And so you have over decades, the drawdown of the amount of available calcium in the soil. And that has negative effects across the board. You're essentially growing plants on steroids, as Jim says, an IV, once you've drawn down the calcium levels enough, because you're going to get your soil locked up. You have a lot less nutrient availability in the soil. Your soil microbes are going to be imbalanced. And so you have to add those high rates of fertilizer in order to grow a crop, because if you don't, you're not going to grow diddly squat. And so what adding calcium back in does is it certainly, calcium is an important nutrient in plant growth. So you're adding that back into the soil. But you're also through the CEC, cation exchange capacity, chemically altering the soil so that it aerates better. So you get more oxygen down in there, which really helps the soil microbes on top of them loving calcium in the first place. And so what Dr. Tietjens found as he was experimenting with calcium is that, like on Atlanta farm, but even decades before that, he could take just bad soil, a greenhouse soil it's just full of salts, it's acidic, it hasn't been properly washed through in years, and he could put calcium in it and grow a decent crop in it. And that would be all that he did, just calcium. He didn't change the soil, he didn't change the fertilizer program. He just added calcium into it, and he saw a massive improvement. And so the simple addition of calcium so changes the chemical, physical, and biological aspects of the soil that it brings benefits for years to come. And it's not a fertilizer, so it's a long-term investment, right? If you spread 10 acres or 10 tons to the acre, that's not a yearly occurrence, right? That, depending on your soil type, that could take you for 10 or 15 years, up to 10 or 15 years before you have to apply anymore. And so as a result of the abuse the soils have had of the drawdown of calcium, it's become necessary to add calcium in as an amendment. And I mean, the results we've seen just show how needed it really is. Like giving a dying man water, you notice a pretty quick improvement in him after he gets a gallon into him. A man dying of thirst, I should say.
That was a great explanation, Zach.
Thank you.
So to kind of go back to something you said before as well, you talked a lot about this basic foundational principles of the program, right? And then you said very briefly, but we didn't really focus on it, that sometimes people deviate in some ways from that there's some flexibility in there. So why do we allow for that? Why isn't it just a cut and dry, like, this is the program, do it this way?
I think we'd be out of business if we did that, because it wouldn't have worked for a lot of people. If we said you have to add this much calcium, you have to use this much growers, you have to put this much when you plant or when you transplant or something, and then you have to spray this much. It just wouldn't work for guys. They'd either, their soil type wouldn't allow for it, or the labor problem wouldn't allow for it, and we'd lose them as a customer and they wouldn't look back. But also it's kind of with the idea being our primary goal is that our customers be successful. Every farm is different. You have different soil types, you have different climates, you have shorter or longer growing season. You have the manager, the owner, what kind of equipment does he use? What kind of practices does he like to do? Does it no-till? Does he plow? What's he growing there? Right? There's so many different variables that we can't account for, right? We can't sit in the office and say, well, if he did put corn in it 10 years ago and then did beans, and then he decided to plant some fruit trees and then they died off after 8 years, and then he put this, and then he needs to do this. Like, that's just ridiculous. He knows what he's done on the farm. He knows what was done before that. He needs to be the one that's making those decisions, because he best knows the variables that he's working with. So as I say, like the foundational principles, you need limestone in most cases. We would highly recommend you using a clean quality fertilizer, and we want you to see the results for yourself, right? Prove it to yourself that it works. So those are basic, but once you get beyond that, how you use calcium, how you use growers, what the self-verification looks like, that's the variable part. That's the part that can go in any direction, and has gone in all kinds of directions. And that's why we've survived not survived, but why the company's done well for 67 years. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I was thinking too, the way you said that, it makes it very clear that if you were a company that said, you have to do this and you have to keep adding this much fertilizer and that sort of thing, I almost feel like if I were the farmer, I'd feel a little insulted, because I'd be like, you're not taking account my knowledge, and how dare you tell me what to do, right? So that
not
makes
to
a lot of sense
mention,
when you put
if that fails, the guy giving the advice, he's not out anything, but the
That's
farmer
true.
just lost the farm. So yeah, who's got skin in the game, right?
Yeah, I think it's very important in that way to trust the farmer, and that they know what they're doing, that they're really the expert.
Yeah.
I love that.
Zach,
Yeah. Who's this?
you cut it back again.
Hey, Steve. Go ahead.
Hey, a couple points on this calcium program. Bear in mind the composition of soils pamphlet that we show everybody at the shows and stuff. All that nutrition is already there.
Yeah.
What you're trying to do is make it available to the plant like a buffet, so it comes and eats and drinks it whenever it feels like it. And John Sensening had a piece of ground here in New York, and he had 8,800 pounds of calcium in the soil sample in the test, and he was just having this yield drag, and he couldn't figure it out. So he put out another 4 ton of calcium, and it brought the land right out of its fog, and was really high producing and valuable, cropland again.
Yep.
And Cornell's right around the corner from me, and the cheese falls right off their cracker when you talk about that kind of high calcium in their soil test, and you're putting out another 4 tons.
Yeah.
Our product here is 600 pounds per ton of actual calcium, and it builds up, quite fast. But the farmer has to do the test himself. He has to apply it and over apply it. And what I've learned by doing that for quite a while now is that all of a sudden you get to this point and everything explodes yield wise, and the soil opens up, and every shovel you turn has got worms in it. On and on.
Yeah. It's the self-verification that's so important.
And there's no such thing as too much calcium, in my opinion.
No.
I've got calcium, 50 ton equivalent per acre on blackberries. Oh my God. they're producing all summer long, and they're monster big, bigger than my thumbnail. I don't know what it. That's all I did was put the calcium right on every plant, a round pointed shovel full, and I did the equation. It's 50 tons the acre.
Yeah.
Hey, I can add to that.
Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, calcium, we've been doing this since 1958. And calcium is the key to using less fertilizer. It changes the whole chemistry of the soil, how the plants use water, how drainage works in your soil. And Doc Tegens really was the one that figured out that getting that subsoil, the depth in that soil, was another key to bigger yields, more so than fertilizer. And these other programs are using all this fertility. And one of the reasons they need all that fertility is, number one, it's not staying on that soil or being used in that soil because of their lack of calcium. They're looking at pH instead of calcium, and there's no correlation between them two. And we see it all the time where they got these soil tests where they got high pHs and the guy has no calcium, and you try to tell him put calcium on, it scares him to death. And that's the thing that's going to completely turn that soil around, is putting that lime on there. And that's a hard sell to get people to do. And that's one of the big keys to just using less fertilizer. Not that the grower's product don't work. It works great, but that really is a big key to all this whole thing. I just had a guy yesterday tell me that I tried telling him he didn't need 200 units of nitrogen. He said, well, if you don't put 200 units of nitrogen on, his corn fires up. And I said, we've never used any more than 100 pounds of nitrogen. And actually, we're using less than that now, because 2 years ago in 2019, my corn showed symptoms of over nitrate in them. It had nitrate toxicity in it because the stalks turned red from too much nitrogen, and that was putting 100 units on. And just like Steve was saying, we've got well over 50 ton. We've got probably closer to 100 ton on some of these fields since 1961. But so there's another reason why calcium is so important, because it does a lot for that plant to just work and regulate and use the fertility that's there. And when you put a little bit of help on, like growers, it can do something with it.
Yep. Thanks, Mike and Steve. That was great.
One more point, if I may. This is Steve again.
Yep. Go ahead.
When you overwhelm your soil with calcium, the only thing you do is you'll be able to farm deeper. Right. It just migrates down and it turns that subsoil into something that's usable and stores nutrition. And my corn every year is Oliver green, because I put a big dose of nitrogen down low and another one on the side in June, and oh man, it just looks gorgeous. And the neighbors, they must wonder what's going on here. I don't know.
You've already got quite the reputation, from my understanding, Steve.
Well, it only comes from research. No, if they say it can't be done, that's the wrong thing to tell me.
Well, they're probably too busy looking at all their disease in their corn.
Oh, it's unbelievable.
I've heard it. I don't remember who first said it, but the farm under your farm. About getting down below that 8 inches or 6 inches at the top and farming all the dirt underneath that. Get that calcium down there. It starts to look a lot more like topsoil deeper down.
That's another problem they have with using all this fertilizer. Everybody's got to use fungicide too now.
What time is it? Oh, it's nearly 10 o'clock. I didn't realize it was that close. Marguerite, Asa, are there any other questions you want to cover?
No, we appreciate you having us on, and we learned so much, and we loved getting to share a little bit about, our stories and who we are as well.
Thanks a lot for coming on, both of you. That was very helpful. And to Steve and Mike as well for piping up, and Matt. Thank you guys. I hope this was informative.
And Larry.
And Larry,
don't
sorry.
forget Larry.
You're right. Sorry, Larry. Thank you everybody for listening in. I hope it was helpful. This will be the last conference call until September of this year. We'll get information out in August. That'll give you everything. But I hope that the seasons treats you all well. Don't hesitate to call myself or anybody in the company if you have questions or comments or anything like that. I hope everybody has a good night.
Thanks.
Thank
Zach.
you.